In 1978, when a woman in the audience collapsed during a live taping, Johnny Carson did something he had never done in his 30-year career. He stopped the show. The monologue was halfway through. Carson had just delivered a punchline about President Carter's energy policy, and the studio audience was roaring with laughter. Doc Severinsen's band was warming up for the next musical cue, brass instruments gleaming under the hot stage lights. Ed McMahon sat behind his desk, grinning, his trademark "Hi!" ready to fire. The cameras were rolling. 20 million Americans were watching from their living rooms. Then, in the fourth row, center section, a woman's head dropped forward. Her neighbor gasped. Another woman reached out instinctively to catch her. A man 2 seats down stood up, uncertain what to do. The woman slumped further, her body going limp against the seat. And Johnny Carson stopped talking. Mid-sentence. Mid-gesture. His hand frozen in the air, cue cards loose in his grip. The smile drained from his face. His eyes shifted from the camera to the audience, scanning, searching. Something was wrong. The studio went silent. Not the polite silence of a dramatic pause. The thick, uncomfortable silence of confusion. Of fear. Carson lowered the cue cards slowly. He took one step back from his mark. Then another. The band noticed. Doc Severinsen's trumpet drooped. The drummer's sticks hovered above the snare. The producers in the control booth leaned into their monitors, squinting. What was happening? Carson raised one hand. A simple gesture. But everyone understood it. Stop. The band fell silent. The stage manager froze. Ed McMahon's smile vanished. And Johnny Carson, the man who had built an empire on perfect timing and absolute control, stepped out from behind his desk. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't rehearsed. There was no plan for this. Johnny Carson, live on NBC, was walking off his mark, moving toward the audience, abandoning the show entirely. Hold on, he said quietly into the microphone clipped to his lapel. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. An urgency. Hold on just a second. The woman in the fourth row was slumped against her friend now, her face pale, eyes closed. The people around her were panicking. A man tried to lift her shoulders. A woman fanned her with a program. Someone waved frantically toward the crew, but no one knew what to do. This was a comedy show. This wasn't supposed to happen. Carson reached the edge of the stage. He didn't hesitate. He knelt down, one knee on the platform, and looked directly at the woman. His face was serious now, stripped of all performance. Is there a doctor in the house? He asked. His voice was steady, but loud enough to carry. We need a doctor. Right now. The audience didn't move. Hundreds of people, frozen in their seats, staring. Some thought it was part of the act. Others knew it wasn't. But no one moved. Carson straightened slightly, his voice firmer. If there's a medical professional in this audience, please come forward. Now. A man in the back row stood up. Then another. A woman near the aisle. They moved quickly, weaving through the rows, the audience parting to let them through. A nurse from New Jersey. A cardiologist from Manhattan. A paramedic who happened to have tickets that night. Carson directed them with small, precise gestures, pointing toward the woman, staying at the edge of the stage like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The cameras were still rolling. The producers hadn't cut to commercial. Because no one had told them to. And Johnny Carson wasn't asking for permission. The woman's name was Margaret Callahan. She was 52 years old. She had traveled from a small town in Pennsylvania with her daughter, Emily, to see The Tonight Show. It was a lifelong dream. Margaret had watched Carson every night for 15 years. She loved his timing, his wit, the way he made the hard days easier just by being there. But earlier that day, Margaret had received news that shattered her world. Her husband, Robert, had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors had given him 6 months. Maybe less. She didn't tell Emily. She didn't want to ruin the trip. So she smiled through dinner at the diner on Sunset Boulevard. She laughed at the warm-up comedians' jokes. She sat in that fourth-row seat, clutching her purse, trying to hold herself together. But when Carson started his monologue, when the lights came up and the laughter filled the room, something inside her broke. The weight of it all, the exhaustion, the terror of losing the man she had loved for 28 years. Her body couldn't carry it anymore. She fainted. Now the nurse was checking her pulse. The doctor was asking her questions in a low, calm voice. And Johnny Carson was still there, at the edge of the stage, watching. Waiting. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, disoriented, trying to understand where she was. Then she saw him. Johnny Carson. Kneeling at the edge of the stage, looking at her with concern. She started to cry. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry." Carson shook his head. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke. He just looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't apologize. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." The paramedic said Margaret needed to sit for a few minutes. Let her blood pressure stabilize. The nurse agreed. Someone brought a glass of water. The audience watched in silence, unsure what to do, unsure what this moment even was. And then Johnny Carson did something no one expected. He climbed down from the stage. Not carefully. Not hesitantly. He stepped down into the audience like it was the most natural thing in the world, his polished shoes hitting the carpeted aisle. He walked to the fourth row, past the stunned faces, past the camera operators scrambling to follow him, and sat down in the empty seat next to Margaret. The entire crew stood frozen. Ed McMahon leaned forward, his mouth slightly open. Doc Severinsen set his trumpet down on his music stand. The producers in the booth stared at their monitors, unable to process what they were seeing. Johnny Carson, the king of late-night television, was sitting in the audience, holding the hand of a woman who had just fainted. "Are you okay?" he asked her. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. I got some bad news today. And I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I don't know what to do." Carson didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. The cameras were still rolling, but it didn't feel like a TV show anymore. It felt like something else. Something real. Something human. "My husband," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's sick. They told me today. And I don't know how to. I don't know how to be strong enough." Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Carson reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, old and creased, the kind of thing someone carries for years. He unfolded it carefully, like it might fall apart if he wasn't gentle. He showed it to Margaret. "This is from my mother," he said. "She wrote it to me the week before she died. I carry it with me every night." Margaret stared at the letter, her hands trembling. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, written in blue ink that had faded with time. She couldn't read all of it, but she could see the words at the bottom. "You are stronger than you know. Why do you carry it?" Margaret asked. Carson folded the letter and placed it back in his pocket. He looked at her, and for a moment, the mask of the television host was gone. He was just a man who had lost his mother. Just a son who still missed her. "Because," he said, "it reminds me that the hardest moments are the ones that matter most. The ones where we have to keep going, even when we don't know how. And it reminds me that we're never as alone as we think we are." The studio was completely silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. 300 people holding their breath. 20 million watching from home, unable to look away. Carson looked at Emily, Margaret's daughter, who was sitting beside her mother, tears running down her face. "Take care of your mom," Carson said. "And take care of your dad." You don't get this time back. Trust me on that. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Carson stood up. He squeezed Margaret's hand once, gently, and then let go. He walked back to the stage, climbed the steps, and returned to his desk. He adjusted his tie. He picked up his cue cards. He looked at Ed McMahon, who was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. Then Carson turned to the camera. We're going to take a quick break, he said. His voice was steady, professional. And when we come back, we're going to keep going. Because that's what we do. The screen went black. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. What happened during that commercial break became the stuff of legend. Carson didn't retreat to his dressing room. He didn't check with the producers. He stayed in the studio. He sat with Margaret and Emily until the paramedics arrived to take Margaret to the hospital as a precaution. Before they left, Carson gave Margaret something. A small card, handwritten, with his personal phone number on it. If you need anything, he told her. Anything at all, you call me. Margaret kept that card in her wallet for the rest of her life. When the show came back on the air, Carson didn't mention what had happened. He picked up where he left off, smooth and professional, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. But everyone who was there knew. Something had changed. After the taping, the producers wanted to edit the segment out. They thought it was too raw. Too unpredictable. Too real for television. Carson refused. Leave it in, he said. All of it. When the episode aired 2 nights later, the NBC's switchboard was flooded with calls. Thousands of them. Letters poured into the studio. People who had lost someone. People who were going through something impossible. People who just wanted to say thank you. Because for one night, Johnny Carson had stopped being a performer and become something more. He had become human. Margaret's husband, Robert, passed away 4 months later. Margaret and Emily were at his bedside. And in Margaret's purse, tucked into the pocket where she kept her reading glasses, was that card from Johnny Carson. The one that said, "You are stronger than you know." Years later, after Carson retired and disappeared from public life, a reporter tracked him down and asked about that night. About why he stopped the show. About why he risked everything for a stranger. Carson smiled, that familiar half-smile that had charmed a generation. "It wasn't a risk," he said. "It was the only thing I could do." The letter Carson had shown Margaret, the one from his mother, is now preserved in a glass case at the Paley Center for Media in New York City. And on the placard beside it, there's a simple inscription. The night television remembered its purpose. Not to entertain. Not to distract. But to connect. To remind us that we are not alone. That even in our darkest moments, someone is paying attention. Someone cares. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because this wasn't just a moment in television history. It was a moment in human history. The night a host became a healer. The night a comedy show became a lifeline. The night Johnny Carson proved that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop. And listen. And care. That's his legacy. Not the jokes. Not the celebrity interviews. Not the Emmy Awards or the millions of dollars or the 30 years at the top of the ratings. It's that moment. In 1978. When he stopped the show. When he climbed down from the stage. When he sat with a stranger and reminded her that she wasn't alone. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years after that night, Margaret Callahan returned to The Tonight Show. Not as an audience member. As a guest. Carson had invited her personally. By then, she had become a grief counselor, helping others navigate the loss of loved ones. She had turned her pain into purpose. When she walked onto that stage, the audience stood and applauded. Carson stood too. He shook her hand, then pulled her into a hug. And for a moment, you could see it. The weight they both carried. The understanding that some moments change you forever. "You saved my life that night," Margaret told him, her voice steady now, stronger. Carson shook his head. "No," he said. "You reminded me why I do this." They talked for 20 minutes. About loss. About grief. About finding strength in the darkest places. It wasn't funny. It wasn't entertaining in the traditional sense. But it was real. And that night, the show earned its highest ratings of the season. Because people don't just want to be entertained. They want to be understood. They want to know that someone out there gets it. That they're not alone in their pain. Johnny Carson understood that better than anyone. After he retired in 1992, Carson rarely appeared in public. He turned down interviews. He avoided the spotlight. But every year, on the anniversary of that night in 1978, he would call Margaret. Just to check in. Just to remind her that he remembered. The last call came in 2004, just months before Carson passed away. Margaret was in her garden when the phone rang. She almost didn't answer. But something told her to pick up. "Margaret." Carson's voice came through, weaker now but still unmistakable. "I just wanted to tell you something." "What's that, Johnny?" "That letter I showed you. The one from my mother. I want you to have it." Margaret's breath caught. "Johnny, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said. "Because you understand what it means. You've lived it. And when I'm gone, I want someone to carry it forward. Someone who knows that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Margaret's home. Inside was the letter carefully preserved in a clear envelope, along with a note from Carson. "Pass it on when the time is right." Margaret kept that letter for 10 more years. Then, in 2014, she donated it to the Paley Center, with one condition, that it be displayed with a photo from that night in 1978. The moment Johnny Carson stopped being a television host and became something greater. That's what we remember. That's what we carry with us. And that's why, decades after his final broadcast, we still talk about Johnny Carson. Not because he made us laugh. But because, when it mattered most, he made us feel seen. He made us feel human. He reminded us that even in a world of cameras and scripts and perfectly timed punchlines, there's still room for genuine connection. And that's the greatest show of all.